Welcome back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to be back, right?
What do you think about that?
It just buys me. I just don't know.
You don't know any longer?
No.
Too much dark side for you?
Yeah, I'm really hungry, and I would like candy because I'm a kid. Yep.
Liking candy because you're a kid is a very important thing about being a kid.
Uh-huh. And yes. I'm gonna leave because my Uncle Herman and my dad actually told me to leave in a second, so yeah. Bye.
You just made us monsters.
I'm going to play like some silly shit like I'm Yours by Jason Mraz.
Welcome to the Darker Side Podcast, where we delve into the darker side of our existences. The morbid, the macabre, the spooky, and the absurd are all fair game as we discuss murder, UFOs, cryptids, creepypasta, the paranormal, and the dark depravity of the human soul. I am David, and with me, as always, is Herrmann. Herrmann, how are we today, brother?
We're good. We're light in the staff department today. But...
Yeah, it's one of the me and Herrmann episodes. Forrest, again, could not be here due to scheduling conflicts and work issues. We all have to work, people.
Yeah, you got to pay the bills, right?
We do. But Forrest will be keeping his podcast, the Getting Lost in the Forest, going again for our second year of these two podcasts. So it's good to be back, dude. Always. I mean, we're getting back into 2019 pretty hard, so... we're going to bring you a part one of part two series today on a serial killer you probably have never even heard of, honestly.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into the news stories. Today I've got a news story here from Gazette Live. The headline goes, Sibling found mummified body of baby brother they never knew existed in dead mother's home.
Ugh.
A small box was found under the stairs, within which they found a small body wrapped in clothing. Inquests here. 3 siblings who were cleaning the home of their dead mother made a gruesome discovery: the mummified remains of a brother they never knew existed. The adult brother and 2 sisters found the remains while emptying the North Allerton home. I think this might be in the UK, probably.
I don't know where Allerton is.
Who knows North Allerton? It's one word. Home of their mother, Carol Thompson, on February 3rd this year, I think, which was 2018. A small box was discovered in a cupboard under the stairs, but once opened, they found envelopes and a small mummified body wrapped in clothing. After the discovery, the siblings took the box to the nearest police station where the investigations were carried out. An inquest held at Solberg Hall in North Allerton on Wednesday heard that the body was a child of Carol Thompson and her ex-husband Melvin, the siblings' parents. The baby appeared to be full term, the inquest heard. Yeah, it's a weird way of...
It reads British. So.
Very, very much so. Detective Sergeant Matthew Wilkinson of North Yorkshire Police, yes,
yep,
we're
there.
Was tasked with heading the investigation into the macabre find, which assisted coroner John Broadbridge. Of course, these are all very British names.
True.
Called the most distressing case he has dealt with within 25 years. Giving evidence at the hearing, Detective Sergeant Wilkinson said the family members, including Melvin Thompson, were spoken to during the extensive investigation, but no one had any idea about another child or pregnancy. It's very crazy. Because obviously the mother's dead. This is her home, I think, after she had passed away. It said, we discovered within an 18-inch box what appeared to be human, mummified infant remains wrapped in clothing.
So clearly these kids don't look for their Christmas presents or anything like that.
Or it just might have been that ultimate spot that they didn't even think about as children.
You know, the cupboard under the stairs is a long history of that.
Yeah, seriously. The children under the stairs, the people under the stairs.
Harry Potter, I mean, it's endless.
Yeah, despite exhaustive inquiries, no light could be shed on how the remains came to be at the address at Dexter Way or the circumstances surrounding the death. A post-mortem and DNA testing was subsequently carried out, which showed the baby belonged to Carol and Melvin Thompson. The testing on the clothing he was wrapped in dated back to the 50s or early 60s.
Wow.
Interesting, right? It's amazing. And like it just goes to the fact that you never honestly truly know a human being.
I guess not.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean,
just doubt everyone and fear.
no, we're not saying that you should not coexist
I
with
am.
people. Because I mean, it's a lovely, lovely thing that life brings you. But I mean, there could potentially be a dark side to any human being that we do deal with, whether we know them or not.
Including your mom.
Exactly.
Definitely your mom has a dead brother under the stairs.
Herman, what do you got for a news story for us, bud?
One of the more horrible things I've read in a long time.
Outside of today's maybe diving deeper topic.
Oh, geez, yeah, no, this is a rugged day. Right? Gird your loins, people. This one's gonna be tough, I think. Yeah. Just in general. So, a Texas man admits to kidnapping, 79 people to anally probe them while disguised as an alien. And there's a picture of the guy. He kind of looks like Gollum from the 2000s. What were those?
The Fellowship, the Ring series.
Thank you. Yeah,
yes.
the Tolkien movies,
Yes.
the Hobbits and whatnot. All right, so Dateline, El Paso, Texas. A man who was arrested by the FBI yesterday has confessed to kidnapping and sexually assaulting several dozen people while using costumes, drugs, and special effects to have his victims believe that they have been abducted by aliens.
God, I mean, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing at the absurdity of it.
Yeah, no, this one's bizarre. So, a 73-year-old Arnold White was arrested after a joint investigation led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the El Paso Sheriff's Office, as well as the El Paso Police Department. So they sort of got everybody in there.
Yeah, all the authorities.
Do you think they were eating the Pace thick and chunky picante sauce?
Quite possibly.
Originally interrogated about 4 crimes committed in the 1990s, the retired trucker confessed to a total of 79 kidnappings across California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas over a period of 40 years.
I mean, these people, I mean, unfortunately, are honestly the prototype of who, what a serial killer could be. They're always on the go.
They're a cowboy on the steel horse they ride.
Yeah, and a literal steel horse.
The literal steel horse. So Mr. White confessed to using a mix of hallucinogenic drugs, I don't know how you're supposed to say it, containing LSD, PCP, to subdue his victims before approaching them and carrying them inside his truck to assault them. In order to further confuse his victims, he had set up the inside of his truck to look like an operating room and would wear an alien costume.
That's a fucking rig.
Imagine that on a head full of acid. Jesus Christ.
Oh, no way, dude. I could barely even imagine it right now.
Yeah, I don't know what PCP does to you, but I don't know. A trucker with an alien mask on acid's more than I could fucking even think about. They described his abuse to be, extremely disturbing. Quote, he would insert fingers and objects into their various body cavities. Oh. He had even created his own sex toys designed to look like alien tools and medical instruments.
Well, so he is methodically going about this.
This guy's nuts. According to Mr. Johnson, most of the victims were loners and marginals, a fact that helped Mr. White evade arrest for so long.
Marginals, that'll come up again later.
Yeah, the marginal fringes of society, unfortunately, are really just not cared for quite in the same way that they should be.
Right.
He chose victims who were gullible and might fall for his traps. Several of his victims were actually UFO investigators he found hanging out around Area 51 or Roswell.
Wow. Just getting the royal treatment with when it comes to alien abduction, basically. That is horrible, but
royal treatment.
Ridiculously ironic.
Arnold White now faces a total of 347 criminal charges, including several charges of kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault by use of drugs, oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance, assault with intent to commit sexual offense, and possession of a controlled substance. That is a litany of charges that I've actually never heard grouped together in a sentence.
No, and I'm glad I've never heard them up until this point, and saddened at the fact that I have now.
I didn't know that we as a society needed a charge for oral copulation by anesthesia, but evidently we do.
Apparently we do.
That time I took a picture with myself inserted in your mouth while you slept. I apologize for.
Good Lord. Yeah.
Never happened. He could face a term of
Fake news.
He could face fake news. He could face a term of more than 382 years to life in prison if found guilty of all counts, and that's where he belongs. The 73-year-old was denied bail because justice sometimes works.
Moral of the story.
I'm done with that.
Justice sometimes works.
Yeah, deny truck driving, drug dealing, Gollum alien of bail. That's a good story.
Yeah. Yeah, there are plenty of really like horrible like people in prison systems who are non-violent offenders, et cetera, that get denied bail.
Yeah.
And sometimes they let the bad people go on bail.
If you went to jail,
this time justice was served.
Yeah. If you served any time in jail for selling a bag of weed, know that this guy did not get posted bail and feel slightly vindicated in your
just those
oppression.
poor all those people. But like, I mean, the investigators, the UFO investigators, no,
on a head full
bad
of
treatment,
acid.
just bad treatment.
On a head full of acid. That's incredible.
Yeah.
All right, well, these stories exist. This is the world in which we live in, so I would hug your loved ones much closer.
Yes, darker side style. Give them a good hug. Tell them you love them, and because potential things like this could happen to anybody at any time, unfortunately. Well, that was our news stories for the day. We are actually going to dive. We're going to get right back into it. No other filler. We're just going to jump into the dive in deeper segment, and we have another serial killer corner.
Yeah, we keep going into these corners. I backed myself into a corner by choosing this one.
You really did. You were like, I don't know if we should do another serial killer. I'm like, yeah, I mean, whatever. Take a break. You're like, you dove right into it head first, not knowing what you were doing.
I did. So I live in Connecticut, which is a lovely state filled with many wonderful people, and is quite overlooked as just a state in our union. Massachusetts gets all the credit. Nobody knows that nobody knows that Rhode Island exists, and somewhere there is the Nutmeg State, which was interestingly enough named the Nutmeg State because it was the largest counterfeiter of nutmeg on planet Earth at the time.
Good.
When spices were expensive.
Right. Yeah.
Now you can buy that at Aldi for 99 cents.
Yep.
Anyway, so in my great state of Connecticut, there was a man by the name of William Devlin Howell, who is considered Connecticut's most prolific serial killer, if you're keeping score. But what was interesting about this was he was on trial, and while there was this enterprising lawyer by the name of Ann K. Howard, who had figured out that this man's crimes might be a little bit more horrible than what he was originally jailed for, and sort of befriended the serial killer, I guess is the only way you can say it, and talked to him, and wrote a book that includes dramatized events that occurred, but also a lot of the serial killer speaking in his own words.
So she was a lawyer and not a journalist.
She was a lawyer and not a journalist, and quite frankly, she's a good writer, and she inserted herself into the story, which made it really interesting and really personal, and actually quite painful to read. And it's a tough story to report on just because of the way the events occurred, and quite frankly, the just horrific nature of the events. But
so the source of this book is that book that you're reading.
The source of this book is the source of this book. The source of this this diving deeper segment is from N. K. Howard's book called In His Garden, that is available. It's available on Amazon. I downloaded it from there. I'm sure there's hard copies if you feel so inclined. But anyway, so William Devlin Howell is considered to be Connecticut's most prolific serial killer because he murdered a total of 7 people, and this all happened around 2013.
2013 or 2003?
Oh, yeah, 2003. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's why I write this down and give him a copy. He was convicted of 6 murders while he was in prison for manslaughter in the 7th victim's death. So he had actually been arrested, put in jail for a person's death, and then while that occurred, they sort of started slowly tying murders to him. The fact of the matter is that in 2017, he was finally convicted. So
of the 6 consecutive
of seven murders that occurred in 2003.
Wow.
That's how fast this went.
Wow.
He dumped the remains of his victims, which a list, in what he called his garden, which was behind a shopping plaza on Hartford Road in New Britain, Connecticut. Basically, it was behind a little strip mall. There was a hill that led down towards a swamp, that kind of scrub area behind those strip malls that you never think about.
Yeah, so if you guys ever want to visit it, it's on Hartford Road in New Britain, Connecticut.
It is on Hartford Road in New Britain, and if you do some research, you can figure out what businesses are there. But I'm not gonna pull them in. I made a conscious effort to not pull any businesses into this.
Good.
McDonald's will get mentioned, but they're not located in that area.
People are smart; they can figure it out if they want to.
Certainly. The area is wooded and marshy, and it's absolutely inaccessible by car, which is part of the reason that the investigation was delayed in as well as the recovery of the victims. But anyway, so again, all of this information comes from Ann K. Howard's book, and I highly recommend reading it if you feel like diving further, deeper still into this man's life. And I got to tell you, Dave, he has a very one-dimensional viewpoint on the world, and you're going to see that as we continue.
I think most serial killers have a very single-minded outlook on their existence and the world's existence around them, which is why they create this reality for themselves.
Yeah, he's an oddly sad and sympathetic fucker, and it just makes you so mad because you know how horrible he really is deep down inside.
I just feel like he's just one of those egomaniacs who can't get over their own ego and then go fishing on like modern times, like on social media, like blah 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 happened to me today, period, and then you get everybody freaking commenting and wanting to get into your life so that you're the center of the world.
Correct. Yes, while being a
complete other fucking piece of shit. Yeah.
So this man from the top is both a serial rapist and a serial killer, and quite frankly, I think serial rapist is really his number one job. He wasn't in it for the kill
initially,
and some of this imagery that is going to be included in this podcast, of which there's some really warped stuff that happened, but some of this imagery is going to be disturbing and painful,
and a lot of it left out, as you had earlier told me.
Yeah, I told Dave that I there's some stuff I just couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Sometimes saying something out loud makes it more real, I guess. I don't know.
But you will hear as much as Herrmann will be able to give us in regards to detail without destroying his inner soul.
Correct. Yeah. So let's take it from here. So Devlin Howell preyed on what criminologist Stephen Edgar calls the quote less dead, and you may have heard of that, but if you haven't, this is the class of folks that he in which he would include sex workers and drug dealers,
marginalized people. Yeah,
people that could go missing. So he also includes farm workers, hospital patients, the elderly, and he also included homosexuals in that list. And I don't know that I agree about that, but it just made me sad to read and made it really hard for me to say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, really people that could go missing without raising a lot of flags. Even in a state as progressive as the joint in which some of us in this podcast hang our hats on a daily basis.
I've also lived in Connecticut at one point in my life, so I understand the state. I mean, we are New Englanders, and it is a part of New England.
Yeah, the North can be cold sometimes.
Yeah.
So the interesting part about this serial killer that really I had a hard time connecting with was the fact that Howell's life is interesting because it's not interesting. It's not a great place to point your finger and say, aha, that's it. Right here is where this son of a bitch became a serial killer. Right. As long as I don't do this to my kids, they're going to be fine.
And these are like the interesting ones because they were born. Because you can't give the situational, nature versus nurture type of thing, where nurture comes into play with a lot of these things like head injuries and abuse and really bad upbringings. You can't do that in this situation. He had a normal life.
By all respects, he had a normal life. He was born in Virginia to two hardworking parents, Melissa and John Howell. Melissa was 40 and John was 45 when William, or Devin, they interchangeably use both of his names, who was the youngest of four, was born. Mom worked at a local fast food joint called Whataburger, and the father was a machinist.
Like most men in that area of time.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic trade and very useful. I wish I was a machinist.
Also lucrative too. I mean, if you were a machinist, you could make quite a bit of money for your family back then.
So in Howell's words, he noted, quote, There was always food on the table, clothes on our back, heat in the winter, and AC in the summer. We were far from rich, but we weren't poor either. My father was tight with money, but we always had what we needed.
Right. Which was a lot like growing up in the 80s and then into the early 90s.
You could honestly use this to describe my life.
Right.
You know, like we had clothes, food, and we had a couple of air conditioners. It was lovely. This was a family with a family of four. There were two brothers that were born 20 years prior to Howell. Howell's mother and father had children, and then for some reason they weren't blessed with children for 20 more years.
Yeah. So it goes, right?
Yeah, these things happen. From his own admission, Howell noted that his older brother, who was more like an uncle, would come over once a week and play card games with the family. So, Ann Howard, who wrote the book, asked, how does Opie become a serial killer?
Yeah, really. How does Opie? Exactly. I mean, he grew up in like the kind of a picturesque family.
Thursday night they played Pinochle. Like the whole family would get together and they'd play Pinochle. I don't know how to play the game, but it's a card game and everybody sat around the table and played games.
Yeah, your older brother would come over, and I'm sure he's got a family or growing or at least a life of his own. Comes over for, and little Howell. Is it William? Devin?
William Devlin Howell. It's hard to pick a name, and they don't in the book, which is maddening.
So Devin or William, he's just like, oh, this is cool, And I mean, he's living the life. I mean, again, he said his father was tight with money, but that doesn't mean he was an evil man or a bad man. He just made sure that they didn't live outside of their means.
Now let me put a couple cracks in the porcelain. This is the serial killer describing his childhood. So, do we trust the words of a serial killer? I don't know, but it's all we have.
It's from the mouth of the beast.
Yeah.
I mean, he's giving you exactly what he knows is his reality, and it seems pretty benign to that point.
So Ann Howard, looking for the holy trinity of serial killers, looks to see if he had anything going on in his life. Did he have any history of brain trauma? No. Was he brutalized by his parents? Howell, under his own admission, noted that his mother was a disciplinarian, spanking him when he did wrong, sometimes using a wooden spoon, and at others a paddle from a paddleball game, which makes that game way less fun, by the way. While this may be viewed as child abuse today, I kind of leave it to you to determine, if that would make a serial killer.
Well, no, because
when the kid grows up.
There were millions of kids whose existence was this. I mean, and even to a point, mine. Growing up, I had a spanking if I stepped out of line, and I've done a relatively good job as a human being, I think.
You've done a good job hiding the bodies.
Yes. They're stacking up, but yes, I've been hiding them for years.
You'll know him by the trail of his dead.
Exactly.
The only real trauma in his life was that his mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when he was 11, and she did die when he turned 15.
Okay.
Which
that can traumatize a child, especially when he's growing. This time of my life was when my parents decided to get divorced. So, yeah, I can understand where this can affect you. A loss of life, a separation of parents can traumatize a person to a point,
But it doesn't,
but you
doesn't
can cure
necessarily
yourself of it.
A serial killer make, right?
Exactly. No way.
So the way Howell tells it, she did at one point ask him to get his father's gun to end her suffering while she was, enduring the pains of cancer. And he wrote, quote, I couldn't stand to see her suffer, nor could I give her my father's gun, and it really fucked me up inside not being able to help her.
Well, which is interesting because he's actually showing an extreme form of compassion and empathy for his mother, but also so much compassion that he couldn't bring himself to actually allow this to happen because he loves his mother. He loves her dearly. He doesn't want her to go, but at the same time, he does not want her to suffer any longer. And he's showing it in such an extreme way by saying, yes, I understand, and no, I can't.
So, where do you see the seeds of the serial killer being planted? Right around the same time. If you start to mine this book and look for connections, I found this line. And he said, and this is right around the same time when he was 14 or 15, he said, quote, I picked up a prostitute and got my first blowjob from a prostitute. I was 14 or 15 at the time. After that, I was hooked and picked up prostitutes for blowjobs whenever I had the chance and the means. It was my secret addiction. Addiction. Jesus. It was my secret addiction. If I had the money and was by myself and passed a whore on the street, I picked her up. Going rate was $20, and I probably picked up hundreds over the years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in which the age at which he's so he's putting this perspective. His mother's sick. She's dying. She dies at 15. He's now at the same exact period of time when he's trying to cope with things, is probably going through this weird phase of sexuality that most men, women do during this pubescent time. 15 years old, 14, 11, 10, whatever. But this is a time within his life that hormonally he's changing, which makes all this other trauma of his mother being sick add on to it. Add into the fact that with power, money, he can get this sexual favor. Who knows? Might be exactly where the seeds of this are brewing.
Yeah, and without making any solid connections, the book alludes to this. So during this time when he was 13 and 22, he dated this one girl, Mandy, who had absolutely no idea about his penchant for soliciting sex. They actually had 2 children together, but when Mandy and William broke up, she left the state and married another gentleman who adopted the children. You see, William Howell had his own demons. During the same time, he had developed a love of liquor,
yeah, I mean, we all know, especially a love of liquor can bring you down some dark holes.
It sure can. But by the time he was 19, he had 2 DUIs. He had some other, vehicular offenses, and had actually had his license taken away.
Right.
One of the things that's interesting about this gentleman is, and I use the term very loosely, one of the things that's interesting is while he had all his DUIs and while he had all his, his problems with alcohol, this man loved to drive. Like, just loved to drive. He drove everywhere, which is kind of how he ended up in Connecticut, but we'll get there in a minute. So, fast forward to 2001, the story between the time when he's a young lad to 2001 is just the story of somebody who got involved with liquor and basically petty crimes, a little bit of theft. He stole a motorcycle when he was a kid, that sort of thing. But nothing that you would expect to turn somebody into a serial killer.
Right.
So fast forward to 2001. He now has a criminal record, including numerous vehicle crimes, mostly involving vehicles and alcohol. He's living in Virginia, and he meets a woman who is 18 years his junior in an online chat room and moves to Torrington, Connecticut. Nice. Which is pretty advanced for 2001, I have to say.
Yeah.
She was 19, he was 30. Their relationship ended somewhat abruptly, as you would expect that sort of relationship to end. And afterwards, William had held a few jobs and had a few other relationships, saved up and bought a 1985 Ford Econoline van.
Was this van white? Oh, God, that's the perfect van for any of this type of story.
The van's going to play heavily in, hence the
foreshadowing.
The slight foreshadowing that I did there. I don't know if you caught that device, but yeah. So he buys this Econoline van. We almost had the opportunity to not have this conversation because at the time after this relationship broke up, he was leaving to move back to Virginia, and met a woman at the gas station who lived in Connecticut and started a relationship with her, and kind of ended up sticking around. That relationship broke up, but that's kind of how we ended up keeping him in Connecticut. He was on his way out the door.
Back out to Virginia.
Yeah, and just bumped into a girl while he was pumping gas into his car.
Interesting. The whole Eve thing all over again.
It's crazy. So at this point, Bill began his career of living in his van, smoking weed and drinking.
Smoking weed is just a thing he's doing.
Okay.
It's not, I'm sorry, I just have to add that. He's smoking weed.
I'm not demonizing the Chiba here. So he began a career of living in a van, smoking weed and drinking, and he would cut lawns and travel back and forth to visit friends in the South.
This sounds like the life of any weed smoking, drinking, living in a van person I've known in my life.
Yeah. I mean, give him a surfboard and put him in California. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It's a little overly simplistic to call him a drifter, but you could, and they did in every newspaper article I poked around at.
It was still the time. The thing to do at the time is a drifter. We actually still had drifters back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, no, it's a viable lifestyle. So Bill met a girlfriend by the name of Dory He also had another girlfriend on the side when he went on his killing spree from February to October in 2003.
Sweet. Side chicks.
So I bring this up. I bring this up because he had a long-time relationship with this woman, Dory. He had a semi-long-time relationship with this other woman at the same time that he was committing his atrocities, and none of these folks had any idea what he was doing because he lived in his van and would show up from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, any true serial killer type of person has a means to make these things not actually interconnect. You know, he's got a brain big enough to hopefully. I mean, if he's going to continue to live that lifestyle, he has to do it.
Yeah, he compartmentalized his life, and it's kind of hard to talk about William Devlin Howell, at least for me. In this book, they dramatically talk about his victims in the order in which they were discovered when he was caught. So he was caught for the third or fourth victim that he had killed, and then they found this and that and the other thing, and
Right.
the investigation was all over the place, and it's really hard to make sense of it. So instead of following the way the book did it, I'm sort of going to go in a chronological order, which is how I struggled to figure this thing out as I was researching.
Right.
So let's talk about his first victim. I'm going to quote from the book. So Ann Howard, who was interviewing him, said, "Who was the first victim?" And this is all a quote. His smile faded away and his voice grew sad. "Melanie Camellini." And this is Howell. Quote, I'm sorry, this is from the author of the book, Ann Howard, which is horribly confusing as well. Howell states that he picked up his first victim, Melissa Camellini, in the area of Grove Street in Waterbury on the first Saturday night of February in 2013 between 1 and 2 a.m. after leaving the Cadillac Ranch in Southington, end quote. This is a roadhouse with line dancing, a mechanical bull, and it's still open today.
It actually sounds like I may have actually gone by this place at one point in my life.
It's quite possible. I looked it up on Yelp, and it actually looks like a really good time.
Funny.
Anyway, so Howell solicited Camellini for oral sex, offering her $20, and then took her to a local McDonald's to complete the transaction. And this is
because you're gonna definitely grab a burger after that.
okay. You're gonna wish you didn't say that after I do this next piece.
I'm glad I set
Glad you
myself
got
up
that
for
out. Glad you got that out before. So, quote from Ann Howard: "When it was over, he grabbed her by the throat with his left hand and forced her down onto the back bench. This is of the van where all of the murders took place." Back to the quote: "While simultaneously grabbing a hammer out of his tool bucket." He writes that he, quote, "put her hands together like she was praying and held her down with a knee as he duct taped her hands together and tied a plastic grocery bag over them. He told her, quote, 'If I hear that bag rattling like you're trying to free your hands, I will pull over and beat the shit out of you,' end quote. He also duct taped her ankles together and sealed her mouth shut with the tape. He, quote, 'did not feel safe,' end quote, in the current location, so he drove to the parking lot of Benco Roofing Company in Torrington, with Melanie bound to the bench, quote, 'so she would not try to jump out of the van at stop signs,' end quote. He knew that the Benco lot would be a good spot where they would, quote, 'not be bothered by nosy cops,' end quote. It was off the street a ways, and they'd be closed with no one around on Sunday. Of course, the location was familiar to him. It used to be where he worked and parked his van to sleep for the night.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Because I was like, did he stake this place out? He just knew it. He knew that it was a place that he could totally bring his victims.
Yeah, I could run through the companies he worked at. You've shopped at half of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
With Camellini in his van, however, Bill had no intention of laying down to rest. He raped her in that parking lot off and on for the duration of the night and did not stop until 2 o'clock the following afternoon.
This was a full 12 hours of torture.
It was a full event of sexual torture, and this is why I had a hard time with this story.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean, I can understand having to read more of this, which I'm pretty sure this is full of it. But
yeah, to sum up a little bit, he then hit her with a hammer and strangled her. Howell states, quote, "I was going to bury her out in the woods, but the ground was frozen. I couldn't dig a hole, so I was kind of was freaking out. You know what I mean? Because I got this dead prostitute in my van, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I went to leave, and I got stuck in the snow in Little Woodstock. I was like freaking out because I got this dead prostitute in the van, and I'm stuck in the snow, and all I need is a park ranger to come by. So I'm freaking out. I ended up wrapping her in a tarp, and I put her behind the seat. And that's where all the blood came from, because I'd hit her in the side of the head with the hammer. And for a week and a half, maybe a couple weeks, I was driving around with this dead body in my van, not knowing how I was going to dispose of it. She bled out during those 2 weeks post-mortem, end quote.
Ugh.
So this man drove around in his Econoline van.
1985, white Econoline van.
I don't know if it was white.
I'm just thinking it's white.
I think it was blue, but that's okay.
Either way, to me it's white.
With a dead woman in the back of his car.
Just bleeding out.
Bleeding out. Mind you, he lives in his van.
Wow.
So he lived in the van.
And I'm wondering, was he freaking out during that? I mean, he mentioned it 7 times that he was freaking out in that quote there. Like, of course he was freaking out.
But does he believe that is he saying he's freaking out because that's what people believe, or was he saying he was freaking out because he was freaking out?
And that's one of the things that you've had an issue about this story, right?
I don't believe anything he says.
Yeah.
I don't believe a word he says.
Yeah.
Because you can see him compartmentalizing people into 2 groups. You know, there's the normal people, and then there's, you know, prostitutes or drug users or whatever term he wants to use.
Wow.
So because Bill couldn't bury the body, he loaded her up unceremoniously in a waste barrel and rolled her down the hill behind a strip mall. He basically high-brushed the barrel, hiding it among some wood pallets, and then fucked off to North Carolina to stay with his old friend Harry.
For the rest of the winter.
For the rest of the winter.
Wow. So this dead woman, what was her name again? She deserves it.
Melissa Camellini.
Melissa Camellini was
Stuffed
brutalized for over 24 hours.
Stuffed in a blue barrel.
After 2 weeks of riding around in his home.
Hit,
and then stuffed in a barrel.
Hit in the head with a hammer, strangled, stuffed in a barrel, rolled down a hill. High brushed with some...
and then he fucked off to North Carolina for the rest of the winter.
That's correct.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So after spending his winter with his buddy, Bill drove back to, or William Howell, or whatever you want to call him. I called him Bill because Ann Howard, who wrote the book, refers to him constantly as Bill.
Oh, we'll just call him Bill from now on then.
Kind of humanizes him a little too much for my taste.
Yeah.
But anyway, he drove back to Connecticut in the spring, presumably to resume his lawn care business. And on his way, he stopped to check on his victim. And he had found her in roughly the same state as she had been in when she was put in the barrel. I don't know if you remember the winter of 2003 into 2004, but it was incredibly cold in Connecticut.
Yeah, it was a cold one. It wasn't very stormy or anything, but it was very cold, Arctic.
Yeah, it was definitely
one of those Arctic blasts that came through and stayed there for a while.
Yeah, it was cold and it was dry and it was really expensive if you were heating a house. I still haven't recovered, I don't think. Anyway, the author of the book, Anne, wrote, or in talking to him, said, quote, "That must have been quite a surprise to you." And to which he wrote, "Well, I was kind of glad of it," he laughed. Know what I mean?
Of course. Oh, know what I mean. Big old question mark.
So he was asked if you know, this whole event bothered him, which is a pretty natural question for one human being to ask another. And he had said, yeah, quote, "Yeah, Camellini really bothered me. I'd never killed anyone before that. See, Anne, I'd been fantasizing about raping prostitutes for a long time, but I'd never acted on the fantasies. Not until Camellini, and then I crossed the line, and the fantasy became real."
Not just real, but fucking real.
So, let's talk about this fantasy a little bit. In the book, Anne writes that he'd been fantasizing about raping prostitutes for years. One day in early February of 2003, he decided that the mere fantasy was not enough. He went to the hardware store, walked down the aisle, looking for items that were required in the commission of the crime. Ropes, zip ties, duct tape, and a hammer. Bill said, quote, "I like this sick fantasy I had, and I wanted to make it real. It was more like trying to build up the courage to actually do it, as opposed to trying to fight some urge to not do it. I had to talk myself, quote, into it, as opposed to trying to talk myself, quote, out of it. So I didn't need to act on it. More like I had finally talked myself into finally deciding to do it, and I knew that when I crossed that line, my life would change forever. My fantasy wasn't to do just one, and I knew that when or if I ever crossed that line, that whoever the first one was would just be the first of many.
I wonder, I mean, people think about the kill thing all the time, I think. I think it's a human nature type of thing. But, like, when that dark fantasy that we all have, we have a dark side, all of us, we think about dark things, whether it be...
Why are we talking about this or listening to something that is...
Exactly. So, but those ones that actually cross that line of that quote-unquote fantasy become a monster. I think that's the line. I think that's the line that he chose. He chose that he's like, I talked myself into crossing that line versus talking himself out of it.
Yeah. This is very much, this is an on purpose choice. This was a decision. Like, I'm going to go learn Spanish.
Yeah.
But instead, he decided to kill people.
Wow.
So, and this is the problem I have with this guy. So we have this. He said, when asked, how do you feel when you were buying those things? He said, quote, I was nervous, excited, scared. We have to reconcile that with this other conversation that he had with Anne, the author of the book, where she asked, why did Camelini affect you more than the others? Just because she was your first? ? And he said, yeah, but also I wasn't sure if she was a crackhead. She almost convinced me that she wasn't. She seemed nice, like maybe she was okay. I found out afterward that she was on drugs, but at the time I wasn't sure. She said, quote, please don't kill me. I have children. My children need me. And according to the book, tears streamed down his cheeks. And he said, quote, that messed with me. It really did. I wasn't sure if I could do it after she said that. And then Anne said, but you did. And he said, yeah, I did.
Yeah, I mean, because, he did.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he admitted to it.
Good Lord.
And I'll leave you with this last piece of William Howell's sunshiny description relative to the rest of his victims, which we'll talk to in the second half of this. And we'll talk about the investigation, how they finally got him. But he said, quote, I'd go through the Mickey D's drive-through with a half-naked tied-up prostitute in the back of his van and told them if they made a sound, it would be their last. None of them did. He would ask each victim if they wanted anything to eat and ordered what they wanted, as if on some kind of macabre date. It would be his victim's last meal. And Anne asked, how could they possibly eat? Their stomachs must have been in knots. And he said, quote, I don't know, Anne, but they always ate. And as they ate, and she said, and as they ate, you would talk to them about sex. And he said, yeah, sometimes. You need to understand that these women had been on the streets for years. I'm sure it was not their first bad experience getting raped by a John. They were probably used to it.
Oh. And we're gonna leave you with that part. Basically, what we with this episode is to open the door into this weird weird character. Unfortunately, all of this is true, which is the sad aspect of this. But like,
it's terrifying.
This guy is not really pigeonholed in any psychopathic hole, honestly. I mean, he's a weird character when it comes to what made him do it. He's just that man who crossed that fantasy line into serial killer. Weird.
Very much on purpose. And yet they paint him the entire time as this sympathetic thing, and yet he's a monster. And the author of this book, I really respect her. I respect her decision to go do this, to really find out about something that, quite frankly,
is
wasn't widely reported, and
exactly.
is terrifying, as you said. But you can't sympathize with this guy. I can't do it. He's terrible. He's right where he belongs.
Yeah. And in the next episode, we'll give you the information on the further victims, part 2 of this, and again, as John said, the trial and his conviction and everything else. So. So this is a weird topic, and it seems pretty gruesome and dark and twisted in the respects that this guy's really hard to understand. He's super sympathetic, but he's also a monster. He did it.
Yeah, he is. And one of the things he said that's really really interesting. He said, "I'm a good guy. I'm the guy who holds the door open for you at the dollar store."
Yeah, and we'll leave it at that, guys. That is the first part of this series on the this Connecticut serial killer that we don't really know much about. And honestly, Herrmann, thank you for bringing this to light, because again, this is somebody that people don't really know about, and this is a type of serial killer that could actually be out there, and could very well be a part of our population.
Yep.
The same type of weird, twisted person.
Just preying on people that go missing.
Yeah, unfortunately. And yeah, guys, so again, that was part 1 of this series, and we'll be back next week, hopefully, with part 2. Maybe we'll have Forrest at that time so we can finish and conclude this series, and we'll get on to another topic.
Something lighter. The lighter side
yeah,
of the darker side.
The lighter side of the darker side. But guys, that has been the Darker Side podcast for this week. I am David. You can find us on all of the social medias. Please like and subscribe. Please review our podcast, any and all of the podcasts on the Darker Side Podcast Network, the DCP network. Please rate them. Review them, give us a rating, because it's just going to help us out in the end. We do have a Patreon as well, so look us up, the Darker Side Podcast. You can find me on all the social medias. You can find my band Frenemy there. We're doing good things in 2019, the podcast and the band and everything else. And Herrmann, what do you got for us, bud?
Yeah, I'm Herrmann Brow at Instagram. Come hit me up and send me pictures of your cats, please. Something light.
Puppies, dogs.
Yeah, anything.
Telephone poles at this point, honestly.
I need anything right now.
Well, guys, thank you so much for diving deeper with us, getting dark, and come back to the Darker Side Park.
He's really into this, guys. Loves it.
Podcast.